Good morning. We'll ask you to go ahead and find your seats, if you will. We're very grateful to have you here this morning for the beginning of the 13th Annual Rocky Mountain Economic Summit. It's my honor today to introduce to all of you the MC for the next couple of days. My name is Justin Hyde, and I am the CEO of Bronze Buffalo Companies, and sit on the board of directors with our wonderful partners at the Global Interdependence Center. It's my honor to introduce to you Scott Keller, the chairman of the Bronze Buffalo Companies and chairman of Keller Investment Properties out of Salt Lake City. I've heard in the past that there's a quote that's my favorite that says, "Do as many good things for many as good people as possible and expect nothing in return." And that is Scott Keller. We're grateful to have him as a partner and grateful for him for his willingness to moderate the next couple of days. And with that, we'll turn it over to you, Scott.
Welcome everybody this morning to the 13th Annual Rocky Mountain Economic Summit. Justin introduced me as CEO of Keller Investment Properties and chairman of the Bronze Buffalo Club and Companies. It's a pleasure to meet with all of you today. In that, the last 15 months or so, we've not had the ability to gather socially or in any other large events without masks especially. So it's a wonderful thing to be able to meet with friends and see so many of you that we haven't seen for a while. And gather and be entertained and educated today with all these wonderful people that are here to speak and teach us. On behalf of the GIC, we would like to thank long-term Bronze Buffalo Club members Kurt and Nancy Richardson and their amazing company Otterbox for their generous sponsorship for this year's events. It has been a tough year for all of us throughout the world. Thank you so much for being here. We are all in for a great treat here for the next couple of days and tomorrow's events. Programs will be available today at noon, by the way. I would like to now invite my partner, Justin Hyde, to the stage, who will now moderate this next discussion and introduce our next guest. If he would come to the stage, please, and we'll continue on with this morning's discussions.
All right, it's my honor now to welcome to the stage our next speaker and guest, Bronze Buffalo Club member Paul Ryan. Paul was first elected to Congress at age 28 and represented Wisconsin's 1st District for 2 decades. He was in office from 2015 to 2019, serving as the youngest Speaker in the House in nearly 150 years as the 54th Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives. We're grateful for Paul's investment and his time here in today's discussion, and we're going to turn some time over to Paul for a few remarks, and then we'll be taking some questions from the audience. Jill will have some Q&A cards going around, and we welcome those questions after Paul makes a few remarks. So please join me in welcoming Paul Ryan.
Justin, thank you very much. And I just want to say, I'm, as a new BBC member with my family here, we're just so excited about what you and your brother Cody and all the people here at BBC, and and the GIC folks for putting this conference together. I just want to, as just a member of this club, thank you for everything that you're doing and for making a great week for us. So thank you very much. Really appreciate that. Thought I'd give half remarks and then half Q&A, and I'll break it down in this way. I'll do short-term, medium-term, long-term. This is an economics conference. I'll stick to my knitting, which is mostly fiscal policy and fiscal policy authorities and observations on that, and what things look like and what our trajectory options are as we go out into the long term. So let's go short term first. Right now, Congress is marginally controlled by the Democrats. You got a 4-seat majority in the House, you got a 1-seat majority in the Senate. So that is razor thin. That is really hard to put together a vote coalition on anything marginally controversial. So what has happened? Joe Biden won the presidency, and we didn't know until a few months after the election that he even had unified government because we both lost these Georgia Senate races. So it came down to a real squeaker at the end as to who was nominally in control of government. I would argue, and granted you know my political leanings, I would argue that he is acting as if he has a huge mandate to go far left, and the progressive wing of his party has really taken over the control of their agenda. That is not what he received, though. He did not, in my opinion, receive a mandate to move radically and far to the left. However, that is the policy agenda that they're pursuing. What do I mean when I say that? The reconciliation bill that they're trying to achieve. What is a reconciliation bill? That is basically a budget bill, and it's a budget bill that cannot be filibustered. I ran tax reform through reconciliation in 2017. I spent my entire career in reconciliation. As I mentioned yesterday, it is a tool created by the Budget Committee. I chaired that for a number of years, and then a tool used by the Ways and Means Committee. I chaired that as well in the Senate Finance Committee. Reconciliation requires a few steps in the process, and I want to explain that real briefly, but I want to go back to the point. What the Biden presidency is trying to do is create a reconciliation bill that gives us a huge step function in the increase of the size of government. So not only do we have entitlement programs that constitute the social contract that are extremely important for American society and citizens, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, the safety net, those are right now not paid for. We are making unfunded promises to our fellow citizens just there. What the administration is now saying is let's add some new unfunded entitlements on top of the ones that we have, and let's partially pay for this with an array of tax increases across the board that, in my strong opinion, would do great damage to our economic vitality. That would do great damage to our ability to compete in this interwoven global economy that we now find ourselves. So reconciliation is a bill that you have to pass a budget resolution from the Budget Committee, from the House to start with, that says we're going to use reconciliation. So you've got to get 218 votes in the House to pass this. So Nancy Pelosi has a 4-vote margin to pass a budget. If she wants to stick to her schedule, and managing the schedule is everything in Congress. That's among the range of functions that you have to excel at as Speaker of the House is you have to manage the schedule and the calendar extremely well. So if you're thinking, these are my objectives for this term of Congress, you set those objectives, then you manage your calendar, and you're basically a traffic cop or a conductor of a symphony. This committee does that, this committee does that, then we go to the floor, we get this, we work with the Senate, and this is our end goal for achieving our objective. They will no doubt have an end goal of achieving this reconciliation bill by the end of this calendar year, by Christmas. The best way to get politicians to do something they don't want to do is threaten their Christmas. You say, you are not going home for Christmas until we pass this bill. That is how it has always been done, and that's how it always will be done. And so Nancy has to pass out of the House, preferably this July, before the August recess, a budget resolution that gives this reconciliation tool, that activates it, so that they can use this reconciliation tool to pass this tax increase bill and this new entitlement bill. That bill technically cannot be passed until at the very earliest October 1, the beginning of the new fiscal year. So just if you're mentally mining the calendar that she is running into, you want to pass your budget resolution by the end of July. You could pass it in September, but you're really risking your calendar. That's a real gamble. So we're going to see by the end of this month, can they get their budget passed that gives them this reconciliation? Then they're going to try and launch this reconciliation in October. You do not want to foreshadow your tax increase, spending increase bill, and then send your politicians, your members home for 5 weeks of the August recess to get chewed up by their constituents. You will not telegraph your punches until after your members have returned back from their summer recess and they're in the fall legislative calendar. What do I mean when I say that? Here is what the Biden proposal is effectively. Raise the top marginal income tax rate back to 39.6. Rewrite the 3.8% tax on unearned income, which came in Obamacare. It's 3.8% basically on capital gains. They want to apply that to pass-through income, active pass-through income. Just think of subchapter S corporations, LLCs, sole proprietorships. So you'll go up to about a 43.4% top marginal income tax rate for individuals. They want to get rid of the 20% deduction that pass-throughs have that we put in tax reform, so that they got the same kind of rate cut that corporations got in tax reform. So you'll see a big debate about how much do we raise taxes on pass-throughs, how much do we raise taxes on individuals, and the big individual rate debate is going to be about capital gains. The Biden administration, and I served for 16 years in Ways and Means Committee with the people who are writing this, Richie Neal and the rest, they believe capital gains should be taxed at the same rate as ordinary income. They don't buy the debate or the point that capital gains is risk-based income. It's income that you may not get back versus ordinary income, which is contractual income, wage and salary income that you know by contract you're going to get. So they distinguish between the two, and they want to tax capital gains at this 43.4% tax rate. You will end American innovation and ingenuity and economic growth if you do that, in my strong opinion. But the only way for them to do this in the economic model that they have at the Joint Committee on Taxation, which is the group that scores these bills, is you have to make a person think, I'm not going to give this money, my business, my capital gains to my kids. I have to consume all this income in my life. So let me explain this real quick. And I'm going to go into this only because I think it matters to a lot of people. The revenue maximizing rate for capital gains tax in the scorekeeping that Congress uses, it's actually a model that I helped buy when I was chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, which oversees this institution called the scorekeepers, the Joint Committee on Taxation. The maximizing revenue tax rate is 28%. If you have a tax rate above 28%, you actually get less revenue because you're overtaxing this. Right now, you have a 20% capital gains tax rate and a 3.8% unearned income tax rate, which is effectively a 23.8% capital gains tax rate. So the best they can do is sneak that 23.8 rate up to 28%, the way Congress currently scores it, the way the economic model Congress uses scores it. But if you require a step up in basis and a realization at the death of a person who owns a business, take a man who owns a ranch over there who's growing potatoes, take a woman who owns a small business over here, that is a subchapter S corporation, you will have to say, we're going to value that, we're going to step up the base of the valuation when you die, and then we're going to trigger a tax on that business at your death as if you sold it for capital gains realizations. That is this proposal, so this realization at death, and if that were to happen, then then the potato grower and the small businesswoman is going to realistically say, well, I can't give this to my kids, so I'm just going to use it all in my life, and I'll therefore pay this tax. That is the current Biden proposal. I don't think they got the votes for this proposal. So I think they're going to relapse back to a 28% capital gains tax. I can't imagine more than four, there are going to be more than 4 House Democrats and 1 U.S. Senator on the Democrat side that's not going to be for this. You would just destroy the intergenerational transfer of family businesses and farms and ranches from one generation to the next. So what they're going to do is go to a 28% tax rate. Then they want to do a global minimum tax. We can talk about this more in the Q&A. They want to raise the corporate tax rate, which we lowered to 21%. The industrial average tax rate on businesses is right now about 22, 23%. It was 24% when we wrote tax reform in 2017. Today our rate is 21. We're in a good sweet spot. We're pretty competitive. But you throw state taxes on there and we're basically back up to about 25, 26%. So we're already a little bit above the industrial average of industrial nations on how we tax our businesses. The Biden plan originally wanted to bring it up to 31. Now they're talking 28. Joe Manchin says he'll go no higher than 25. So there's a debate about how high do we want to raise the corporate tax rate? Not if, but how much can we get away with? On top of that, they want to do this global min tax, which says, let's get all the countries in the world to agree we're going to at least tax all of our businesses at some minimum rate, like 15%. This is the tax harmonization school of thought that Janet Yellen has, to her credit, been consistently in favor of her entire career. It is sort of the anti-Irish tax. It is I'm from Wisconsin, we're next door to Illinois, they're a basket case, we've got our act together. That's why a lot of businesses are coming to Wisconsin from Illinois. I've talked to some Californians, I've talked to former Californians at this conference who are no longer in California, who are in Texas or Montana or Idaho for the same reasons. So the school of thought that is being kicked around right now is those of us who believe in tax competition. Ireland should not be penalized for lowering their tax rate to 12.5%, which gave us the Celtic tiger, which gave us this economic renaissance in a country like Ireland, for being competitive. What the Yellen tax harmonization crowd says is, no. We've got to all agree, jump together, we're going to have a minimum tax rate that we're going to tax all of our businesses. And they've got a letter that some countries signed through the OECD, many of which have sort of backslid on this letter since then, that basically says, yeah, we'll look at doing this. This is a total bait and switch. And what the administration is trying to do is get their allies in Congress to believe that this will happen so that we can raise our corporate tax rate without any fear of making America less competitive. I don't think that debate is going to work. I don't think they're going to succeed in those arguments. And so this reconciliation fight is going to be a huge fight. I'm spending a lot of time on the short term because the short term is going to translate into what the long term looks like. So they're going to come out of the August recess. They should have the reconciliation tool intact, which is the budget resolution that they should have passed this month. If they don't, they're really cramming into a tough schedule. But assuming they have the ability to pass a reconciliation bill, meaning on paper, then they're going to go try and pass this thing. And that is a tax increase along the lines I just described. They'll negotiate as much of a tax increase as they can get. 28% on capital gains, 39.6% on individuals, another 3.8% tacked on top of pass-throughs, and a corporate tax increase, and maybe this global minimum tax. That's not going to get them the kind of $6 trillion, $4 trillion tax increase they want to whet their spending appetite. So then they're going to have to decide how much deficit spending can we absorb. So it's X is tax increases, Y is deficit tolerance, votes to get a deficit, equals Z, the size of the package and the new entitlements they want to create. I would argue that these entitlements, I won't go into it, are the kinds of entitlements that will further encourage people not to work. They're the kinds of entitlements that will give even more frustration to our labor force participation rate problems. That brings me to the medium term. If they can pass this bill, we will know by the end of the year if they can do this. As I mentioned last night, they're on a razor-thin majority. If Glenn Youngkin, who is a friend of some of ours, wins his governor's race in Virginia on November the 2nd, a Republican winning a blue state, that is going to scare the heck out of marginal Democrats in the suburbs, in the House, and statewide Democrats who are on the bubble. Just pick your state like Georgia or the rest. And I think if Glenn Youngkin wins that race, that's going to wipe about 2 months out of their 4-month calendar that they're envisioning they can pass this thing. So we're going to watch all of this drama play out in the rest of this year. If they can pass the reconciliation package, I do think that's going to be damaging to the economy. I do think it's going to put us back. When we came in when we took our majority and I became speaker in 2015, we wanted to reconnect our country with our principles. We wanted to put back in place our free market principles and show that this worked. We had the Reagan era. The Reagan era ended, practically speaking, with the election of Barack Obama. And we wanted to showcase our supply side principles. I'm a second generation supply sider, which means I care about size of government deficits and debt. First generation supply siders, John, you probably nod, didn't care as much about those things, but they cared about economic growth. So we wanted to show our pro-growth principles in addition to our concerns about debt and deficits. We were able to execute our pro-growth principles. We were able to get regulatory relief. We were able to get once-in-a-generation tax reform for the first time since 1986. And the economy we got coming out of that was marvelous. we had the bottom two income earners, the poorest of the poor, getting the best wage increases. Their wages were rising faster than their prices, and they had a serious increase in their standard of living. We were beginning to reignite upward mobility. Unemployment hit levels we had never seen before. Labor force participation rates were hitting good highs, and economic growth was looking great. Then comes the pandemic and stops the entire thing. And the government rightfully had to jump in and respond. And so here we are now with a bit of a debt overhang, with labor force problems, and now we have fiscal policy responses. That's why I'm getting to the medium term here, where we have a lot of labor force policies at play. If you're paying people more marginally to stay home and not work than to work, then people are going to be rational actors. They're going to not work. And I would strongly argue that the current employment policy, our labor policy, with these supplemental unemployment rates, is a huge contributing factor to this unemployment problem that Charles Evans was talking about. Combine that with school COVID policies and all this other problem, and you have this transmission mechanism where it's getting hard to get people to take jobs because of all of these circumstances. So going into 2022, going into the medium term, our big problem is going to be inflation, perhaps, but it's going to be labor force. If we hit the economy with a tough tax increase, that's going to slow things down. If we don't hit the economy with a tough tax increase and we defeat this reconciliation bill, which I think it's probably 50-50, then I think we're going to start growing out of this thing. I think we have the fundamentals in place for our economy to be sound and to be growing. I'll leave it up to these economic forecasters to tell you what that looks like in specific. But if we prevent the reconciliation bill from passing because the Democrats just can't muster the votes, then I do feel like we'll have some pretty good growth rebound. What I see happening in the midterm elections, and this matters a great deal, is we should get the majority in the House. We only have to pick up 5 seats. Redistricting alone should net us 2 to 3 seats. And I do believe because of the Biden administration moving pretty hard left and the culture war that's ensuing in part because of that, that ought to get us the ability to pick up some seats, enough to pick up the majority. Even the Senate majority, I think, is definitely within reach. And then we truly have divided government in 2022 through 2024. If we truly have divided government in 2022 through 2024, you're not going to see any new tax increases. You're not going to see any new entitlements. You'll see Congress working on whatever it is they can agree on. We talked about China last night. I think that's one of the things Congress is agreeing on. If reconciliation doesn't succeed, infrastructure is something most people agree on. You'll see some progress there. If that is the base case, where they don't have a big step function increase in the size of government by enacting new unpaid for entitlements, new uncompetitive tax policy, and just things that people cooperate on, that's pretty good. Then we're going to have, I think, some pretty good economic growth, and then we're going to have one whale of a presidential election, which will really start basically in 2022. And then the country will make a decision where it wants to go. Over the long term, here is my biggest concern. I'm watching my clock to make sure I stick my time here. My concern over the long term is many, but one of my chief concerns is the loss of our reserve currency status. The dollar, since the Bretton Woods Agreement, has been the world's reserve currency. The French, I don't know if it was Jacques Rueff or de Gaulle or whoever, called this an exorbitant privilege. It is an exorbitant privilege. The fact that our currency, this was a point of our strength in 1944 when we could really set the terms for a monetary system, and since then, we have been the reserve currency. That means commodities are traded and priced in dollars. Oil is priced in dollars. That means dollar is the reserve settlement mechanism for a medium of exchange throughout the global economy. This gives us huge advantages. Chief among them is we can borrow a bunch of cheap money. We have a social contract that is extremely important that keeps our society working together. We have basically guaranteed health and retirement security for the poor and the aged. So when you retire, you know Social Security is going to be there. You know Medicare is going to be there. If you fall on tough times, there's a safety net that's there for you, and there's health care that's there for you. A really important social contract that basically Republicans and Democrats agree on, frankly. This is something we agree is good and necessary, and it's a consensus we achieved in the 20th century. Here is the big problem. That contract, in and of itself, is on an unsustainable footing. That if we do nothing else, that because of demographics, the boomers retiring and the rate of health inflation, which is faster than the rate of ordinary inflation, is the compounding interest that gives us a huge and massive debt. If we show the world that we're never going to get this under control, if we show the world that we have exercised no discipline to get this debt under control at some point in the future, then our ability to maintain our status as the world's reserve currency is going to be severely questioned. Meaning, they're going to think we're going to monetize our debt. They're going to think the Federal Reserve is going to take the easy way out because the fiscal authorities, Congress, can't do it, and they're just going to inflate our way out of our debt, which means the world will look for other currencies. I don't think China can replace us. There's really nobody right now that can replace us, but it doesn't have to be a single currency that replaces us. It can be a multipolar world with multi-currencies that end up replacing us. Either way you slice this thing, we will no longer be able to borrow money at cheap rates like before. The interest on our debt will become the biggest government program we have. That means the ability to afford this social contract will become unaffordable. That means when and if this ends up happening in a decade or two, we will have to cut these benefits in real time to real people. Think of the social and political chaos that ensues if and when that happens. So the real question over the long term is, can we get a grip on this? Now, my party has been typically the fiscal conservative party. And I wrote our first 4 budgets when we took over a majority in the 2010 election. And we showed in the House, we passed this for 8 years. We passed budgets that balanced the budget and paid off the debt. Took about 30 years, but paid it off. So we showed there's a way to do it, and we more or less know how to do it, but we were never able to line it all up. We could never get this budget passed through the Senate, let alone get a president to sign something like this into law. Our party has frankly slipped on this since then. We've become more populist. We've not wanted to give tough medicine to voters. We've not wanted to show that we're going to trim benefits now or in the future. But as recently as 4 or 5 years ago, we raised the retirement age. We means-tested entitlements. We turned defined benefit packages into defined contribution programs that are market-based delivery systems. So the question is, will we get our hand on this? I think the best shot in the medium term to preserve a good long term is probably a commission, not unlike what Alan Greenspan had in the early 80s to fix Social Security. It was a commission that said, here's a budget plan to fix this, and Congress has to vote on it up or down. They cannot filibuster it, they cannot dodge it, they cannot amend it. Like the base closing commissions for military base closings. That's a bill that, frankly, my friend Mitt Romney is the primary author of, but he's got just as many Democrats co-sponsoring this bill as Republicans. That bill, if we take the majority, it has a good chance of passing. It wouldn't surprise me that Joe Biden would sign this thing because it wouldn't take effect until after he's out of office. But that is, in my opinion, the best shot we've got. And I'm a person in Congress who just wanted to do it ourselves. I don't want to delegate our lawmaking authority to somebody else. But I don't see Congress close to the discipline of getting a kind of a budget passed that gets these entitlements under control so that we can dodge the debt bullet and show the world that we're taking care of our own business, we're going to pay our bills, we're going to honor our debts, we're not going to inflate it. And the good news in this tough story is you can have it both ways. You can have health and retirement security for Americans throughout the 21st century that delivers these benefits in a way that people want them, that they work, and get your debt under control. But it requires an ideological change of heart. It requires grabbing the innovation that comes with the private sector. It requires allowing innovators in healthcare to be innovators. It involves the private sector to deliver new solutions that lower costs like they have in all these other aspects of our economy in areas that the left does not think should be occupied by the private sector. But if you can grab this idea, I'm talking about healthcare and entitlement reform that involves market-based delivery systems, choice and competition, define benefits for the poor, but define contribution for everybody else. If you can do that, then you can dodge this debt bullet. Here's the last point I want to make because I'm watching my time here. At the end of the day, we're going to see a model fight. Illiberalism versus democracy. The China model versus the American model. The democracies of the West versus these illiberal countries that are using technology to harden and tighten their grip on their citizens. China is becoming a ubiquitous surveillance state that is using technology in order to not only take, IP from the West, but in order to keep their citizens under control. And they are going to go out to the world and show that their model works better. And this is the last point I'll make, which is on the reserve currency status. I think having crypto out there is a good thing. I think crypto is exciting and interesting. It's not everything. There's some irrational exuberance with blockchain, no two ways about it. But it is bringing a level of accountability to fiat currencies. It is doing what Hayek talked about in the 50s and the 60s. It is bringing a level of accountability to government managed money that says if government continues to mismanage this money, if you're just going to show us that you're just going to print more money to pay for these promises and inflate your way out of this, we're going to give people some alternatives. The fact that this exists, I think, is going to help keep government a little more honest, a little more accountable. That's point one. Point two is we're going to go digital. China is going to be the first mover on a digital currency. That's already baked in the cake. They are digitizing the RMB. They're moving as fast as they can. We will be the second mover. And I do believe it. I know Charles gave sort of an agnostic view on this. I don't think the Fed is going to have a choice but to have a Fed dollar and a digital currency. It's going to take time. They got to do it right. They want to make sure they get all the details right. And in the meantime, if we have an ecosystem of digital currencies, of stable coins, of crypto, and we can get into the Q&A what that stuff means, that is based in America, if America can be a hospitable place for this innovation to occur in our country, then we will have hyperscale firms that are American, not foreign. We will be able to, I believe, preserve our reserve currency status. So the stakes are extremely high, which is we will have a great 21st century for our country, for our values, for our principles, if we get a couple of things right. Charles was right. Immigration is extremely important. The reason these models show low growth is because labor force participation. Boomers are retiring. Fewer people are following them in. We need to top it off with skilled immigration. We get immigration right, and we get entitlement form right, and we basically help preserve our reserve currency status, and we get the digitization of currencies right. Those three things, I believe, will secure another great 21st century American century. But more than that, it will help secure a great century for freedom worldwide, because we will be able to prove democracies can get their act together. Democracies, even through consensus in republics, can fix their problems, because what these tyrannical, ubiquitous surveillance states are trying to say is these democracies, they can't do it. They're too polarized. They can't make decisions. They can't do the tough stuff of governing. We're run by a couple of people. We can make it work. We use technology. We're better. We're faster. This system is better. That is the debate of the 21st century. We do two or three things right. I believe we're going to win this thing. And I think at the end of the day, we are going to get these things right. And it is exactly what Winston Churchill said best about Americans. The Americans can be counted upon to do the right thing, but only after they've exhausted all the other possibilities. So I think that's where we are, and I have just hit my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. We've got a few minutes for some Q&A here, and we've had some questions sent up from the audience. It's good to hear that the old "I'm going to cancel Christmas Santa Claus" trick is alive and well, even in Congress. I know parents have been playing that since the beginning of time. When do you think, Paul, is it realistic, and specifically when do you think this year will we get a infrastructure and reconciliation bill passed?
So these two feed off of each other, and there's a constant dynamic occurring here. My buddy Rob Portman is one of my best friends in Congress. Put together a good infrastructure package with the Democrats. It has what we would call traditional infrastructure without big tax increases, and it's paid for it. It's around $1 trillion. This gives moderate Democrats something to really grab onto and to go home in the midterms and say, I've done something. The reason the progressives are so upset about this and saying to Chuck and Nancy, and President Biden for a second said this, oh, we tie this to reconciliation. We're not going to pass this thing you moderates want to make you happy and get reelected. until we get our big reconciliation tax increase. That's why I'm excited. That's why I think this infrastructure bill, if they can pass that makes it easier for a moderate Democrat to say, I got what I need, I'm not going to go down the path and vote for this big reconciliation package, it's going to kill me. So what Nancy will want to do is not pass this infrastructure bill, hold it back until she can get this reconciliation thing passed and make her members walk the plank on that. And then give them the infrastructure package. That's a dynamic that's in place here. I believe, probably better than 50-50, frankly, that we have a really decent chance of defeating this reconciliation package for all the reasons I mentioned. You only have to get 4 House members to not do this, and plenty of them are upset about this, and 1 senator. If and when that were to happen, then I think you're going to guarantee that this infrastructure thing passes. So they have something to talk about. So they have something to go home. The silly season of re-election starts in February of 2022. That's when primaries begin. They've got to have something to go home and show for their majority, and infrastructure will be it. If they do reconciliation, I think that guarantees we win the House.
Excellent, thank you. Yesterday, we had a bit of a private roundtable discussion. And you had suggested that Biden's strategy towards China is a bit more cuddly and less clumsy than Trump's strategy, but the end goal being the same. What would you recommend that the government does differently on China to pursue the U.S. interests, and how do you think this supply chain will evolve accordingly? What are the knock-on effects for the U.S. businesses?
I mean, Trump and I had, 10 arguments on 232, which is this steel tariff. I didn't like the way they picked fights with basically all of our allies. I encouraged challenging China on these fronts. And I think what is being done and what should be done differently is let's work with our allies to join forces to confront China together, to give a unified global front to China stealing intellectual property and bullying weaker countries in the third world with One Belt, One Road. The one thing that Trump didn't do and Biden's not doing that I think should be done is join TPP. Look, I was chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, just lost to the guy in the 2012 election and built this tool, Trade Promotion Authority, for Barack Obama, the guy who beat us, to go get trade agreements. I think TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, 11 Asian nations, including Pacific nations, is a really good step in the right direction to get the Asian democracies to trade with us and to engage in the global trading system on American terms with Americans writing the rules. That to me would be a huge step in the right direction. We need more trade agreements. If we don't get trade agreements, then we're getting frozen out of markets. You always have to keep getting better agreements because all the other countries are getting agreements between themselves. So it's extremely important we do that. So I think what Biden's doing well is he's building a multilateral front of allies to deal with China together, but he's not doing anything to really achieve that. Meaning there's something you can sink your teeth into, like TPP or some other agreements that are out there. So that is the problem. We don't have trade like we should, but we need to confront China on the technical stuff. And that's where we rewrote the CFIUS law, which is a law that controls sensitive technology from going into other countries' hands. That law now needs to be well executed, and I believe there is consensus for this. And so a good China strategy is to figure out where you want decoupling to occur, all the things that are sensitive technologies, whether it's AI, machine learning, the Internet of Things, quantum computing, you name it, semiconductors, you name it. That's where we say, we're putting up a wall, we're not gonna trade with China on these things, we're gonna do it with the West, and then we're gonna have to have a reasonably constructive relationship with China where we trade in goods and services that do not give them an advantage over us with respect to technology, intellectual property, theft, or a defense advantage. So you're gonna have to find a way of working with China where you can, not working with them where it is a strategic loss to you to do so, getting your allies to agree in kind to do the same, and that is, I think, how you frame the 21st century on this fight between China and its lesser cousin, Russia, and its battle to try and prove its model is better than our model.
Excellent, thank you. We've got about 5 minutes left, Paul, and you've been knee-deep in the weeds on tax reform for a long time. 2 questions here. What will be the biggest stumbling blocks for passing the tax bill, number one. And number two, if we don't raise taxes in the U.S., is the financial path we are currently on sustainable? How do we pay down the debt?
It is. So it is sustainable. Let's start with the last first. It is sustainable because we need economic growth. You cannot fix these problems without economic growth. Economic growth doesn't fix every problem, but it makes every problem easier to solve. And it does fix some problems. So economic growth in a global competitive society is extremely important. And we have a tax code now that is globally competitive. If we change our tax code and make it globally uncompetitive, then we're going to do a lot that's going to hit economic growth. We already have long-term projections that are pretty ugly to begin with. Why would we want to settle on top of that, these labor force problems we have, a tax code that sets us back? We will get better revenue. I'm not saying everything pays for itself. That's a first-generation supply-side comment. We will get better revenue with economic growth. It is spending that is the challenge. We will debt finance. We will have deficits for a long time. The question is, can we pass laws in the near and medium term that change the path of these entitlements? It doesn't change it for people in or near retirement right now. It changes these entitlements for my generation, the X generation on, in such a way that we know and the bond markets see that we're going to get this debt under control at the end of the day. We call it the pig and the python, which is the boomers going through the system, getting the benefits promised to them that they were promised, borrowing a lot to do it, but when that is through the system demographically, that's the nicest way of saying people will die. Behind that are changed entitlement systems, defined contribution benefit delivery systems for healthcare, for example, that show over time, especially if we use accrual accounting, the debt is going to get under control. By the mid to late 21st century, we have put laws in place that show that when the demographics stabilize, we're going to get our debt under control. If we do that now, then we will be rewarded for this fiscal responsibility on the come, and we will be able to preserve our reserve currency status, I think. We will be able to avoid a debt crisis, and we will be able to take pressure off of interest rates.
Excellent. We've got time for one last question, and so piggybacking on that, would you support an increase in corporate tax rates to ensure all companies pay something? And would the 15% global minimum tax be a good place to start?
I think it's a terrible idea. So I forgot the last part of your question. How likely is this thing going to pass? Yeah. So how likely is this thing going to pass? Let's just say 50-50 to be as objective as possible. I got to think
Don't
it's going to
shoot the messenger.
Yeah, I got to think it's pretty easy to get 4 people in the House not to vote for it. If you're thinking about capital gains, Richie Neal will introduce his bill probably in September, maybe in October, and the date of introduction is going to be the date of the effective date of these tax increases. So the way this works is, if you're chairman of Ways and Means, when you publish your bill, it's usually the day before your markup. That's the date of tax increases. So people always ask that question. The global min tax, or raising the corporate rate, is a terrible idea because it basically says we've got to get all these other countries, what is it, 138 who signed this thing? I can't remember. We have to get all these other countries to agree to unilaterally disarm a competitive tax regime for their countries. So if you think, Ireland, Estonia, Switzerland, Germany, Japan, Korea, we don't want you to be more competitive and to bring capital formation to your country and grow your economy any more than we're going to. Let's all stare together, and we think we can get an agreement like that to hold. That's what the global min tax is. I think it's a terrible idea, and the corporate income tax rate doesn't raise a lot of money. It is a small piece of our revenue feeding our federal government. It's on a good year, it's $400 billion. That's nothing compared to what we raise in income taxes, in FICA taxes. So the idea that we're going to harass U.S. corporations and make them pay higher taxes than their foreign competitors were, and the way this proposal works is U.S. companies will be seen at a huge disadvantage to foreign companies in America unless we get all these other countries to do the same to themselves. I think it's folly, it's not going to work, and it will dramatically slow down economic growth, and you'll restart inversions. We stopped inversions with tax reform, which is a U.S. company becoming a foreign company. It was happening on an increasing basis. We brought it to a screeching halt when we passed tax reform. that proposal will undoubtedly restart inversions where U.S. companies, one of the reasons you see me drinking Coors and Miller and not Bud is because, A, Coors and Miller is better than Bud. It's made in Milwaukee, not St. Louis. But we brought the InBev CEO into the Ways and Means Committee and said, why are you guys not based in St. Louis? You know, Budweiser's been there forever. Why are you a Belgian company? So, it's easy. Federal tax laws. We pay a 24% tax as a Belgian company instead of a 35% tax as a St. Louis company. So they became a foreign company. On and on and on the story went in the last decade. That story stopped. That story will start back up. And you will undoubtedly see U.S. companies having to, for the sake of international competitiveness, moving overseas and re-domiciling their headquarters overseas if that proposal passes.
As always, Paul, thank you for being generous with your time today. So many questions, not enough time, so thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Appreciate it.